She said it so casually that at first I thought I had misheard her. We were standing in the kitchen of our townhouse in Scottsdale, sunlight pouring through the glass doors, the kind of quiet morning that usually made everything feel stable. Then she placed her coffee mug down, looked directly at me, and said she planned to keep her ex-husband's last name after our wedding. Not out of obligation, not for legal reasons, but because, in her words, it was more beneficial. I remember smiling, not because I found it funny, but because my brain hadn't caught up to what she had just said. Her name was Vivian Aldridge, and until that moment, I believed I understood her. We had been engaged for 6 months. We had toured venues together. We had argued over seating charts, guest lists, and the exact shade of ivory for the invitation paper. We had even signed a lease on a new home under both our names. Everything felt like momentum. Forward, certain, but standing there, hearing her justify keeping another man's last name as a strategic advantage, something shifted in me that I couldn't ignore. I asked her to repeat it, slowly. She didn't hesitate. She explained that her current last name carried recognition in her industry, that opened doors, that people took her calls faster, that changing it now, after everything she had built, would be a step backward. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was measured, almost rehearsed, and that's what unsettled me the most. Because this wasn't a spontaneous thought. This was something she had already decided, long before she chose to tell me. My name is Carter Whitfield, and I'm not someone who cares about tradition for the sake of appearances. I didn't need her to take my last name to feel validated. That wasn't the issue. The issue was what she chose to keep and why. Her ex-husband's name wasn't just a label. It was a connection, a history, a past that, apparently, still served her. I asked her a simple question. If the roles were reversed, if I wanted to carry my ex-wife's last name into our marriage because it helped my career, would she be comfortable with that? She paused, just for a second, but it was enough. Because in that pause, I saw something real. Not anger, not confusion, but calculation. She said it would be different. She said men weren't judged the same way. She said people wouldn't understand it. And that answer told me everything I needed to know. Before we go further, drop in the comments and tell me, would you accept your partner keeping their ex's last name for career benefits? Or would that cross a line for you? Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't about a name. It was about alignment, respect, and what we each believed marriage actually meant. Over the next few days, I didn't confront her again. Not immediately. Instead, I watched. I paid attention to the small things I had previously ignored. How she still received emails addressed to Mrs. Aldridge and never corrected them. How she kept framed awards on her office wall with that name engraved in bold. How she never once referred to her past marriage as something she had fully closed. It wasn't that she was still emotionally attached. At least, not in the way people usually think. It was something more subtle, more controlled. She had extracted value from that chapter of her life, and she had no intention of letting it go, even if it complicated the next one. A week later, I brought it up again. This time, we were sitting at a restaurant in Paradise Valley, surrounded by quiet conversations and dim lighting that made everything feel more intimate than it actually was. I asked her directly, if we moved forward with the wedding, what exactly would change for her? She looked at me, slightly confused. She said everything would change. We would share a home, a life, a future. But her name, she insisted, was just a professional detail, something separate from us. I nodded, but internally, I couldn't reconcile that. Because names aren't just professional. They're personal. They're symbolic. They're how the world identifies who you belong to and, more importantly, what you choose to belong to. I asked her if she would ever consider changing it later, after a few years, after her career stabilized even more. She shook her head, not aggressively, just definitively. That's when the conversation stopped being theoretical. Because up until that point, I had convinced myself there might be flexibility, that maybe she just needed time. But her answer removed that possibility completely. There would be no change, no compromise, no future version of this where we eventually aligned. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since we got engaged. Distance. Not physical, but emotional. The kind that doesn't show up immediately. The kind that grows quietly in the background until one day you realize you're standing next to someone you don't fully recognize anymore. Over the next few days, I made a decision I didn't tell her about. I postponed our venue booking. Quietly. No announcement. No confrontation. Just a phone call and a deposit adjustment. Because I needed space to think without the pressure of timelines and expectations. A few nights later, she noticed something was off. She asked me if everything was okay. I told her the truth. I said I wasn't sure anymore. Not about her, but about us. She looked genuinely surprised. And for a moment, I wondered if she had truly not seen this coming. If, in her mind, this was a small issue. A technicality. But for me, it wasn't small. It was foundational. It was about whether we were building something together, or whether we were simply merging two separate lives without ever truly becoming one. She asked me if I was really considering calling off the wedding over a last name. And that's when I realized how differently we were seeing the same situation. Because to her, it was just a name. To me, it was a signal about priorities, about identity, about what she was willing to hold on to, and what she was willing to leave behind. The conversation that followed wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, controlled, but heavy in a way that words can't fully capture. We talk about expectations, about independence, about what marriage should and shouldn't change. And somewhere in that conversation, it became clear that neither of us was wrong. But we weren't right for each other either. The wedding didn't happen. There was no scandal. No public fallout, just a quiet decision between two people who realized, a little too late, that they were building toward different versions of the future. Months later, I heard through mutual connections that she kept her name, exactly as she had planned. And from what I understand, her career continued to grow. Doors kept opening. Opportunities kept coming. And honestly, I don't resent that, because she made a choice that aligned with who she was. Just like I made a choice that aligned with who I needed to be. But here's the part that stayed with me. It wasn't about the name. It was never about the name. It was about the moment you realize that love, on its own, isn't enough to bridge a gap in values. Before you move on, tell me this. If you were in Carter's position, would you have stayed and adapted or walked away before the wedding? Because sometimes the hardest decisions aren't about right or wrong. They're about recognizing when two truths simply don't fit together.